I'm indifferent.
I don't believe in God.
To the existence of
God is not judging them.
I don't have proof.
I don't know how to pray.
They're judging themselves.
You know, where is God in all of this? This is my home.
God exists.
What does it say about God that he created the orgasm?
I don't pledge allegiance to anything.
I don't pray.
Only to God.
If there was a God,
And I thought,
I just have this understanding that life is hard.
he could never love me after this.
God is still good.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Maybe God Podcast YouTube channel. My name is Eric. I'm the host, and if you're new here, a special welcome to you. And I hope all of you will please take the time to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and of course, ring the notification bell so you always get notified of our new weekly content as we push it out. We'd like as many people as possible to be a part of the Maybe God family, so thank you in advance. Now, our guest today is a very special guest, and we're going to talk about a little bit of a different topic today, but I think it's a topic that is important to everyone, believers and non-believers alike, and that is the safety of our children. And our guest is Rania Mankarious. She is a public safety expert and CEO of Crime Stoppers of Houston. She has a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, as well as a JD from the University of Houston. She's also a former seminary student, so that's pretty exciting. We'll talk about that in a minute. And she's running the largest public safety nonprofit in the fourth largest city in the U.S., and she sits at the forefront of keeping kids, families, schools, and communities safe, both on and offline. In 2021, Rania released her first book. It's called The Online World, What You Think You Know and What You Don't, in which she seeks to bridge the digital gap between parents and kids so they can develop a family safety plan for their online engagement. Rania Mankarious, thank you for joining us and welcome to Maybe God.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Tell us a little bit about yourself, just a little bit of background and personal stuff, who you call family and where you call home.
Oh, well, that's a long one, but I'm going to try to shorten it. So I'm a Boston native, born and raised, 18 miles west of the city in a town called Framingham. Ethnic community. My parents immigrated from Cairo, Egypt. I was the only person in my family born in the U.S. And grew up in a really tight-knit Christian home. My parents would often say, you know, you're very lucky to be raised in America. What are you going to do? What are you going to give back? And culturally, in our culture, you know, kids are raised like, you're going to either be a doctor, a dentist, an accountant, an engineer. Like, it's very rigid. But my parents weren't like that. My sister is an entrepreneur. I'm obviously doing something very different. Ended up meeting a Texan somewhere along, I think I was at BC, Boston College at the time, he was doing his residency at Mass General, and we dated off and on. And he was very clear he wanted to get married, but there was no way he was leaving Texas, which I have a bone to pick with Texans for that issue. I mean, there was no way he was leaving Texas. And we ended up getting married. I moved to Houston in 2004. Master's degree, law degree, didn't know what I was going to do here, had been raised in this really unique house with all these unique conversations about how are you going to give back, and came to Houston where I was just this, you know, whatever girl from Boston. And God had a really unique way of plugging me into the last place on earth I ever thought I'd work, doing the last thing on earth I'd ever thought I'd do, and walked into the doors at Crime Stoppers in 2006 just because it was a nonprofit, and I was just going to start working in the nonprofit sector. So strangely fell in love with the mission and left accepting an internship at $10 an hour. Called my husband on the way home. He said, "You're a crazy person. What are you doing? You know, it was funny because when I called, he said, "Hey, how was your interview?" I said, "It was good. They offered me a job and I took it." He said, "Are you in-house counsel? What are you?" And I was like, "I'm an intern at $10 an hour." Which he thought was crazy. But that was sort of where I found my home in Houston.
Yeah.
That was 17 years ago.
Wow. So at that point, were you already a lawyer?
Yeah, I had finished.
That makes the story even crazier.
I know. I was, and what's funny is in Boston, my sister and I ran this really massive international magazine she started, and I ran the business side of it, and living between Boston and New York. I mean, you meet so many people, you have so many opportunities, you do all this stuff. And I kind of came to Houston, and somebody recently told me you were a nobody from nowhere. And I was like, well, that kind of stings, but it's true. You know, I was a nobody from nowhere. But I was fine with that. And I was fine starting as an intern at $10 an hour at an organization that just spoke so deeply to me, very randomly. Because all through law school, I said I would never do criminal law or anything in crime.
Why?
It's too hard. And to be honest, it's sort of like sin. And I know that's a weird concept for some people, but it's like the depravity of man, the evilness of man. It's everything that's so harsh, just right in your face at all times. And I didn't want to be in that space. Yeah. And it's not that I didn't want to be in difficult spaces, but I didn't want to be in that space. Yeah. But Crime Stoppers has such a unique way of dealing with these issues that I was very drawn to it.
Yeah. So you've talked about your work as a calling and a ministry. I've heard you refer to your work at both those things. And you also, as we just were discussing before we went live here recording, the fact that you went to seminary stood out to me. So tell me about that. It's not the first time I've heard somebody go to seminary and law school. I went to law school for a while.
I was going to say, I didn't know.
I went to law school. That's as far as it went.
It didn't leave a good impression on you, it seems like.
I actually really enjoyed it, but God got a hold of me and really shook me up, and I became a Christian halfway through law school.
Oh,
and,
wow.
And dove in full bore into ministry, and kind of a long story. But I think people drawn to justice sometimes tend to be drawn to God's justice and like the world's legal systems as well. And because you have a heart for doing what's right.
And you have a heart for serving. And I think what people often forget is like, you can really understand the power of justice, but it doesn't mean you don't have compassion for those who commit crime. And so I feel like we have to have a broad spectrum of love for everyone, wanting to pour into those who commit crime versus, including love for victims and families and seeking justice for them. And so I've always sort of been interested in this mix of justice and politics and media just my whole life. And I mean, I was like a third grader in love with Barbara Walters. Like it was so random and so weird. But my life journey after Boston College, where I did theology and psychology and pre-med, I said, I need to do something that's really just what I feel like serves the community and what I feel like God is kind of calling me to. And so I went to Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and did a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. And that's where I got it. And it was the best 2 years of my life. And my parents were like, what are you doing? Why? Well, isn't that a waste? And I'm like, no, it's the best thing in terms of investment, because to be honest, you meet people from all over the world, and they are all, though, a product of their family. And the families can look so different, but they are a product of that upbringing. And I find if you can figure out a little bit about the family roots and what it means, and it tells you so much about their language, what their interests, how their perspective, what they see. I find that fascinating, and I really wanted that education.
Yeah. So you've been there at Crime Stoppers since 2006.
Yeah, 17 years.
What was it specifically about that organization that really just lit you up? Like, what is it, the mission or their approach? I mean, everybody's probably seen or heard the commercials and announcements from the outside looking in, but what was it about the organization that got you?
Well, it wasn't the website at the time, nor was it the name, because when I saw it, I was like, oh, this organization, Crime Stoppers, and I had not heard of it. It's not very big in Boston. And they were looking for an attorney with marketing experience in media, and I had that. So I was like, I'll go interview, but I don't know. But when I walked in, and the executive director of the time was Catherine Cabanis, who's very loved. She's a Houston native, so respected, so loved. She was part of the appeal to me. I wanted to work with her, and that was a big draw. But as she started to talk about the mission to solve and prevent crime in partnership with citizens, media, and the criminal justice system, I saw so much value there, but I also saw so much room for growth. It was really just a tip line, which was phenomenal and doing great work, but there was so much room for, to solve and prevent crime through education. And I was really drawn to the challenge of that and to almost like rebranding it. And she said, come in, we're only looking for an intern. If you're willing to take it, we'd love to have you, and start helping us sort of reshape the organization. And that's what I was very lucky to do with Catherine for many years.
Wow. So talk about your trajectory there. How long were you an intern at $10 an hour up to now where you're the CEO?
So I was an intern for quite some time, and then got bumped up to like director of marketing. And in 2013, Catherine Cabanis was appointed by Governor Perry to the bench, and she was leaving Crime Stoppers. She even said, Rania, come with me, come to the courthouse. But at the time, the board said, we want you to interview for the executive director position. And I thought, I don't know that I can. You know, Catherine is tough as nails. I mean, she's a tough, strong woman. And I said, I don't know. I'm like a mom of three.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not tough like Catherine. And before Catherine was the current DA, Kim Ogg. She used to run our organization. She's so tough. I said, I'm so different. I just don't know. And they said, but we want you to interview. And I did interview, and they offered me the job. And I remember calling my mom. She said, you'd be crazy not to take it. I said, I don't know that I'm qualified. She said, you'd be crazy not to take it. So I did take it. And I haven't looked back since. You know, it's been an incredible journey.
What are some of the challenges of your job and just, let's say, making justice happen in a city like Houston? I mean, just from law enforcement all the way through, like what are some of the specific challenges to a city like Houston?
Well, there's a lot of challenges. I mean, personally, I think a lot of nonprofit leaders will tell you it's a very lonely position. You know, you kind of get everything thrown on you. It's a little bit of a thankless job, but everybody who's ready knows your number when they want to complain, that's what it is. But it's a very fulfilling job because you feel like you can impact people's lives. Challenges are also include, we have to fundraise, and a lot of people don't always identify with your mission or see the value in it. And the community we serve, victim families, is not the community we fundraise from. So there's like a disconnect with population too. But then you deal with the very real issues of crime in a city like Houston. It was not as a big of an issue until about 2 years ago, when the whole topic of crime itself became political. And who is the victim? For the first time, it was like, well, who is the victim?
What do you mean?
Well, you would think the victim was the woman who was raped or murdered or whose children were killed. But then all of a sudden it was, well, maybe the victim's the defendant who had no other choice but to rape the woman. I mean, you start to hear these, for us, like crazy discussions. And
where's that coming from?
Well, originally from really important questions around criminal justice reform. You know, you cannot argue that the justice system mistreats people. I mean, inherently, it's been doing that for many, many years. I mean, you have enough money to pay to get out of jail, pay your bail, you go. The guy next to you who committed the same exact crime but just doesn't have enough money, he's going to sit in jail. That's unfair. So there were a lot of questions around equity and justice and discrimination that were so valuable. But what happened, and it's what's happening in our society right now, everything sort of gets blown out of proportion. We flipped the entire system with really the focus on just the criminal. And the victims got left behind. Organizations like ours, it's like, well, you know, are you really doing the right thing by looking for criminals or talking about crime and public safety? And so that's been sort of the biggest challenge to navigate through that politically. We've never had to do that before.
Right.
And now it's gotten a lot better. We had 2 years of craziness. It's definitely gotten a lot better, but major cities across the country were dealing with what we were dealing with.
Well, it seems like you say it's getting better. I continue to see, you know, the news stories of crime waves in big cities, and you know, the news loves to sensationalize everything
Yes.
and scare us all to death. So we keep watching. But at the same time, what are some of the manifestations of that ideology, which says, you know, we don't just blame the perpetrators of crime, we blame the systems that led to them. You know, it goes all the way back to like socioeconomic equity, right? It's like it's not a fair world.
Yeah.
And so it's not fair to blame criminals for committing crimes when they had a tough hand that they were dealt. Like you said, important conversations, but how do those, how have you seen that be made manifest in the legal system?
Well, I think bail reform is probably the biggest example of that. And Houston, the O'Donnell case sort of led the way in 2016 with the decision that if you've committed a low-level crime, a misdemeanor crime, nonviolent first-time offense, you shouldn't even pay bail. You should just get out on a PR bond, or get out of jail free card. We actually said, all of us in the system said, that's right. That's what should be done. The problem was with the ideology and this massive push to reform, you saw people apply the theory and the spirit of bail reform when they're dealing with capital murder cases or really violent defendants. And so you look at crime numbers and crime across major cities, usually the spike tied to that nuanced change within the criminal justice system in terms of, We're going to let people out pre-trial, really dangerous people out pre-trial, because it's not fair to hold anybody pre-trial. And sometimes you actually have a really dangerous person. You think of family violence cases. You think of women who've been abused and finally get the courage to call law enforcement and get law enforcement to intervene. You think of law enforcement who risk their lives, some of the most dangerous cases, domestic violence cases that they walk into. And then that perpetrator gets released the next day and goes back home. That woman is facing, potentially death at this point. So
Right.
There's just been a lot of consequences to this really massive push to reform systems. We need to reform, but you can't dismantle a system until you have a new system in place.
That's a good word. So what you're saying is the politicalization of it was certain politicians, maybe of one stripe, wanting to make special interests happy leading up to an election, making these kinds of decisions. And then other politicians from the other stripe, sort of trying to capitalize on that as well by pointing fingers and all of that. It just got too political.
It got too political, but I will say what's so interesting is the elected officials, at least in the Houston area, we're very lucky to have all of them. Agree or disagree, there isn't one, maybe there's one, but with the exception of that one who I will not name, but he doesn't like us very much, but that's okay. But like you look at our mayor, you look at our county judge, you look at our senators and our representatives, again, with the exception of one rep, but that's okay. But you look at all of they actually serve with ideology, with actual passion for what they believe. And yes, there's special interests, and yes, there are people that are sort of, that cater to the donors, but I feel more that there's just this deep, deep sense of believing in their version. You look at like Representative Dan Crenshaw, he believes wholeheartedly what he's saying. Then you could look at County Judge Lena Hidalgo. She believes wholeheartedly in what she's saying. And it doesn't seem necessarily polarized due to money or funding, but because they're standing on very deep-rooted beliefs.
Beliefs they ran for office on.
The beliefs they ran for office. And they're two different sides of the coin, two different sides of the aisle. And I think that's so inspiring to have people that serve with such deep-rooted principles. What's hard is if those principles, at some point, we have to come together and serve together and do what's best for the community, period.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that you see it in some ways getting better. That's good to hear.
I do.
And one thing that we see that just doesn't seem to be getting better at all, I don't know how involved your organization, Crime Stoppers, or you personally are with this, but is just what's happening with our schools.
Yeah.
And not just locally, but across the nation, and violence in our schools, school shootings, recently in Nashville. Mm-hmm. What kind of work do you do with that, or what are you seeing?
So we actually run the largest safe school institute in the state. We've been in the school since 1997. Well before anyone was talking about school safety, our team was in middle schools and high schools. We recognized that the students were the first line of intelligence. So many people talk about school safety and they're like, okay, kids, just stop talking for a second. Let the adults figure this out. And the kids, they're the ones that know everything. They know who's going to bring a gun, who's going to bring a knife, who's selling drugs, who doesn't like who. They know everything. So we focused on the kids. In 1997, middle schools and high schools, talking to them, and we found that they actually want to share the information they have. They're afraid of retaliation. So the fact that we offer an anonymous platform, they hung on to it and they called us. And going into middle schools and high schools consistently all these years has led to us being able to remove almost 300 weapons from Houston area schools before they could ever be used against another student, because the kids themselves are afraid. We've had some kids that call and say, little Jimmy is selling, this is a true case, 54 different types of prescription medication from out of his locker. Can you imagine if you go up there and you're like, I want a Xanax, a Percocet, an Adderall, and there's like, you have other medical conditions or these don't go well together. Now you worry about fentanyl. I mean, these kids know what's right and what's not right. And so they talk to us and we're very thankful for it. Now that program's expanded. Now we're in kindergarten to 12th grade. We're not talking about, the tip line to elementary school students, but we are talking about what does it mean to care about your community, to respect authority, to respect law enforcement. Who's a stranger, who's a bad stranger, online safety. We got to start talking about teen dating, violence in early middle school years, drugs, terroristic threats, gang activity, human trafficking, grooming. Our kids today, I will say, without question, our kids today are not being raised in a world that's even remotely similar to the one you and I were raised in.
Yeah, you start your book, which I see a copy of here.
Yeah.
I've got the PDF on my computer, but you started by saying I was a child of the 80s.
Yes.
And I was resonating with that because I thank God, not every day, but lots of the time, I pray I thank God because of the innocence of our upbringing, relative innocence.
Yeah.
But the old people, when we were growing up, were saying the world was lost then.
Yes, now they're like,
Madonna.
it's gone.
Like a virgin was the worst.
Yes.
And, that would be nothing today. It's overly sexualized, but overly violent as well. But when
It's
we
everything.
think about some of this violence, and school shootings are at the forefront of every parent's mind, what are you seeing that sort of contribute to that phenomenon? What sort of cocktail of
So school shootings specifically, I think it's a mix of students who went through a system where they felt isolated, they felt insecure, bullied, isolated. They did not figure out a way to adjust or cope. They didn't have a community that was reaching out to them, helping them adjust and cope. They become suicidal and then homicidal. So they're willing to take their lives. They're happy to take their lives, but they're going to take out others with them. And they usually go to the source of the pain, or want to inflict the most horrific pain they can. And what's worse than a school shooting? I'll also say schools were not built to be safe structures. You go into an airport, there's one way in usually. There's not 17 different entrances, and 50 different ways to get to your gate. You're literally, thousands of people are pushed through one or two security points where
Right.
they're literally checked.
Same at a bank or other places. Like usually there's one.
Yes, and the building is built with physical safety in mind. Schools are not that way. Schools were built in the 60s, 70s. You have many different ways to come in and out for kids to play. The playground's open. The fences are old. So it's also a soft spot, like in terms of security. And so it kind of set itself up to have our kids be sitting there, easy targets. But that whole culture's changing in terms of schools they are the safest place for your kids to be. School communities have done so much to secure, even if they're in old buildings, but to secure your students and to have a plan in place to talk about how they're going to respond to a threat. Even down to, and this is one thing I always, tell parents, please make sure your school has done this, but even down to making sure the local police department, the local fire department have the updated blueprints for the school. If there's going to be a school shooting and you want to say the shooter's in the cafeteria, you don't want the police pulling a PDF of the blueprints from 6 years before where the cafeteria is mismarked because you've done some constructions or renovations and now they don't know where the cafeteria is. So even down to those details, reunification, where the kids go when they leave school, how do you get to your children again? All of that, the schools have poured so much money and effort and time into updating and creating methods if they didn't have one.
Yeah.
So it's still scary. It's awful. I have 3 kids. It kills me, and I know you have kids. I don't know if you've ever heard them talking to each other, like, what would you do if there was a shooter in the school? Like, well, I know we've been trained, but like, what would you really do? I want to die when I hear them talk about it.
Same.
I want to die.
What really gets me is when they joke about it. Because that's their way of just sort of coping, right? And they'll joke about this or that, and it's just it's devastating. But there's no easy way out of that reality, because that's the world we're living in now. It's I guess it's better that they talk about it than they keep it locked in somewhere inside and let the fear and anxiety fester. Everybody that talks about this loudly seems to have their idea what the solution is. You got some people that say it's just take all the guns away, which seems unrealistic at this point for our culture. And you got people saying, well, let's arm the teachers, which I'm so glad my high school teachers didn't have any weapons when I was acting a fool in their classes. That seems a little bit extreme. What do you think are real practical solutions other than the ones you've shared already?
Well, even if we were to stop manufacturing guns today, that doesn't solve the problem, because there are so many out in the community and they're in the hands of wrong people. And then you have kids online creating ghost guns that actually kill people. So the issue is more systemic and goes to the culture and goes to sort of the hearts of people. I will say if I have to like go through the bullet points, we do have to be stricter in terms of who we sell guns to. There has to be a better system of getting guns, selling guns, or the transfer of gun ownership. We have to have harsher penalties for people who do commit crimes with guns, whether it's stealing a gun or using a gun in the commission of a crime. And right now, those laws are not where they need to be. There was just a study, the Kaiser Family Foundation just did a study about home ownership, gun ownership in homes. And 75% of the people that did have a gun in the home, 75% said they store the gun loaded, usually not in a locked location, and the ammunition right next to it. So if you have a kid in the house who's distressed, that kid has easy access to that weapon. That's a problem. So if you do have a gun, it's your right. I have no comment. But I do think it has to be secured properly and not easy for kids to get.
And penalized, if you don't properly store or secure.
But how do you enforce that? That's the problem.
Right.
And then I think community engagement. We've got to raise a generation that doesn't say, you're different, I don't like you, I'm going to shun you and isolate you. We've got to say, okay, maybe you're different. Maybe we're not going to be the best of friends, but you want to sit next to us at lunch? Fantastic. You had a funny thing you want to share with us? Great. We've got to embrace each other. We don't have to all love each other, but we've got to embrace one another, because that helps remove some of the deep aggression and that feeling of you are nothing. If I were to shoot you today, it doesn't matter because you're nothing. We've got to start building bridges between each other. And we've got, as a community, to systemically engage in those solutions. We've got to say, if we see something, we've got to report it. If we see someone in distress, we've got to embrace them and advocate for solutions that need to be spoken about every single day.
Right. No, it's a tough one, to say the least, and grateful for your wisdom and the practical insights. I also like your positive tone about schools that are really working to shore up some of their own susceptibilities to these problems. And sometimes all you hear is just negative stuff.
No,
about
the
everybody.
schools are fantastic. They're doing such a good job. We work with them, from the principals to the boards, to the parents, to the PTAs, to the school-based law enforcement, to the janitors in the schools. They're all so involved, and we're very proud of that.
You don't often hear about the values we hold in common across all kinds of aisles and political differences, and I wish we heard more about that. Like, we all want to keep our kids safe, and there's a lot of agreement about how to do that. One of the most shocking things about reading your book and following your work, though, is just the realization that school is not the least safe place that our kids are or can be these days. And that's, I guess, part of the reason why you decided to write this book about our kids in digital spaces and the online world. And why did you decide exactly to focus on this? Let's show our viewers.
It's right
there.
My little baby right here.
The online world.
Well, it's we were speaking at a school. Our organization was speaking at a school in, I think, 2016. They were fourth graders, and this is the Fort Bend area. And we had like celebrity guests that day, Rula and Ryan. So from 104.1 KRBE, very popular radio station here in Houston. And they were celebrity presenters, and we gave them a script. And I'm in the back of the room. We have the entire fourth grade, all the fourth grade classes in this auditorium, and the parents to the left and right. And we gave Rula and Ryan the script. And so they're saying, hey, how many of you kids are on Facebook? And the kids are like, no, boring. It's where our parents are. And we're like, okay, we know. How many of you are on Instagram? Woohoo. How many of you are on Snapchat? Woohoo. And then I waited for this question. How many of you are on Kik? And it's spelled K-I-K. And a sea of hands shot up. And Eric, they didn't just like, yeah, that's me, but like straight arm. Like, that's when a kid's like, yes, that's me. And I took a picture, and I shared the picture in our presentation. And I remember looking at the parents to the left and right of the room, and they're like, what is Kik?
Like Kickstarter?
Yes. Are the kids kickboxing? It's so fun. What is Kik? And at the time, Kik was one of the most dangerous social media platforms a kid could be on. One of the most, and you had a sea of like 9-year-olds on it, and parents having no idea. And so I really honed in, and I had young kids myself in elementary school. I really started focusing. I spent 5 years researching this area and talked to other experts that said, you know what, kids should just not be on technology at all. Well, it's not totally realistic. talk to other parents and say, I'm trying so hard. I'm trying to learn the apps. I'm trying, but every time I learn it, they're on something different, or I think they can hide it from me. I don't know the technology. We didn't grow up with it. And then kids who would say, I'm literally in the worst possible place and I don't even know how I got here. And so I wanted a solution. Crime Stoppers, the spirit of our entire organization is solutions. We want to work with everyone. We want to find solutions for everyone. And so I spent a lot of time talking to kids of all ages and creating evergreen solutions that a parent says, this works from here forever. And kids would say, I actually agree with that. And I buy into it. And so that was a difficult feat, but a lot of prayer. I will say my dad's a chemist, but he's also an artist. And so he was a beautiful painter. And he always said, Rania, your talent is in writing. And I want to see you write a book before I die one day. And that was always, okay, Dad, whatever. Well, about 3 years ago, we knew he was getting really, really ill. And so when COVID hit and I wasn't driving anymore and I was home every day, I said, I'm going to take this time and write a book. I want my dad to see it before anything happens to him, God forbid. And so this book was published on Thanksgiving. He was at my house Christmas. I handed him the book and then he died shortly after.
Wow.
It meant a lot that he could see it.
Yeah.
And because he was sort of the desire for me to give that to him was really pushing it, but I had been doing the research for 5 years.
Yeah. How did he react when you showed him?
Cried. We're a family of criers. My dad and I cry at Tide commercials. So he was really proud and really moved. And of course it's dedicated to him and my mom and my sister and my girls, my husband. But he said, I always knew you had this in you. So
Wow,
it was
that is
really
so cool.
very special to me.
Yeah. It's a very important book.
I hope so. I think so.
Oh, it really is. And it's a little overwhelming, but it's a necessary read for any parent these days. I'm a parent of 2 teenagers. You have teenagers and a soon-to-be teenager.
Yes.
And we are absolutely defenseless unless we do our homework. Most parents are, we grew up in a more innocent time and are just not as literate as we should be or could be in terms of protecting our kids against what they're actually up against. And our kids think the things that are, actually out to get them are like the coolest things.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so they are also defenseless in some ways. Tell us a little bit about just the gamut of different sort of nefarious things going on online that led you to write this book.
Well, there's so many. One, it was the reality that all of our kids are connected to technology. I mean, I'll talk to parents that say, well, I'm not going to let my kid get a phone. I'd say, okay, well, do they have an iPad? Oh my gosh, yes, of course they have an iPad. So do they have a smartwatch? Well, yeah, I have to be able to reach them. Do they have a digital camera? Yeah, because they like photography. Do they have a PlayStation? Well, of course they have a PlayStation. I'm like, well, that's the number one way boys access pornography is through their gaming consoles. So we cannot cut out technology. And 2, there are so many, and technology is fantastic, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, where would we be without it? But like everything that's good, people find a way to make it bad. And so there's a lot of people who say, this technology gives me direct access to your children. And I want that for negative reasons. And so what does that look like? It's asking for nude pictures. It's trying to lure kids out of their homes. It's selling them pills that are laced with fentanyl. It's abuse that's so relentless that kids are taking their own lives. It's exploiting kids for money, blackmailing them. It's identity theft. The number one victim of your home for identity theft is not mom or dad. It's usually a kid under 18 because you're not running a line of credit on your child until they go to college. There's so many different things. And, one thing that's always stuck with me is when you really study predators, it dawned on me that the greatest gift you can give a predator or somebody who has ill intention for your child, the greatest gift you give them is a child and a family that's oblivious to the dangers. And so let's not do that. Let's equip and inform. I'm not saying stay offline. That's ridiculous. I'm saying do it safely. And I say crazy things like post like celebrities, do stuff because it means something to the kids that makes sense forever.
Right, right. Yeah, it can be overwhelming, but it's just a matter of are we going to do the due diligence and protect our children or not?
Yeah.
Those are the choices. And as much as it feels like an insurmountable task, I think parents have to dive in, and you're going to win some and lose some, but you better go down fighting if you're going to go down. And I think it's worth the fight. Your book opens up with sort of a preface from a couple that lost a child, and one of them is a familiar name, Dr. Laura Berman, and Sam Chapman wrote about their son, Sammy. This foreword was so touching, but tell us why you invited them to write that.
Well, when I was writing the book, I saw, I've loved Dr. Laura Berman for a long time because I love the way she took her issue, and created ways, she deals with family therapy, relationships, sex therapy. And I thought it was very interesting the way she made that very palpable for the average person and mainstream. And I thought that was great. And I admire that because I wanted to take public safety and family safety and do and sort of mirror what she was doing. And so when I saw the news that their son died, I reached out to them right away and ended up talking to Sam Chapman, who's he's just an incredible man. And I was so blessed to speak to him. And he said, Sammy died and Laura and he now are advocates for the safety of children online now forever. They said they didn't realize, how bad and how dangerous the space could be. Laura and Sam live in California. The death of Sammy took place during COVID lockdowns in California, where the lockdowns were very strict. Maybe not as, Texas, it wasn't that way or as strict as California. The fact that their beautiful, precious son, Sammy, who earlier that day said, "Mom, I know what internship I want to do that summer." Their son, Sammy, whose parents are they have a beautiful marriage. They're so involved in their boys' lives. Like they're so in tune with their family, that Sammy said, "I want to find, I have this place for my internship." And they said, yeah, we're going to go get burgers. Laura Berman said, "I'm going to go get burger. I'm going to come back and we'll talk about it." When she came back with the youngest son, run upstairs to get Sammy, he's dead in his room. The trauma of that experience, and Sam Chapman talks about that day and, oh my God, the trauma of that day. But two, the discovery of how did we just lose our son? And you're telling me he went on a social media platform, clicked on an ad, paid somebody less than $1 and got a pill sent to our house, and it took it. It's laced with fentanyl. He died instantly. That's the story. Like, it's impossible. It's impossible. And so they will change the safety of the outcome or social media safety for children because they know so many people and they're not going to stop.
So what was it that their son took? Do we know?
So he tried to get, I think it was a Percocet or a Xanax, but he didn't get that. It was laced with fentanyl and he died instantly. And so...
Why would a drug dealer go online and pay for an ad to sell a pill for less than $1?
Well, they have an entire market of children buying things and prices go up as you become more dependent. These pills are cheap to get. They get them in bulk. They don't care if they're laced with fentanyl. It may kill you. It may not. Either way, you're going to become addicted, and they have a lifetime buyer. And what are the consequences? Social media companies are not going to share their information because they protect the privacy of their users. I made an ad. I got in trouble. I'm going to delete that whole account and I'm going to start another one, which I think is what the dealer did in this case. In Sammy's case, the DA threw out the case because he apparently had the pill in the home for 3 days and didn't take it instantly upon receipt of the pill.
What difference does that make?
Well, maybe Sammy tampered with it. I mean, ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous things. So it becomes very hard to prosecute. It's very hard to investigate and prosecute. A lot of families, my God, this is the biggest thing. And Sam Chapman and Laura Berman talk about this too. When Sammy died, it's like you have to have all the passwords for your child's phone because Apple's not going to unlock it. They're saying, well, Sammy's privacy, it's his phone. it's
A child?
It's the child's phone, and you don't have right to access this stuff. So you as parents have to have the passwords to your kid's phone, to social media platforms. And I have countless stories of where this has saved children's lives because parents knew the password, so they could figure out who the child was talking to, who possibly abducted their children, because they were able to get in to the child's social media accounts. That's a really important thing for parents to know.
Yeah. So you're sparking some of my lesser angels here. I am a little bit of a conspiracy theorist sometime, and I have to check this part of me because I know it's not right to be this way, but I'm paranoid about big tech, man.
Yeah.
What's their angle? What's the game they're playing? The only thing I can think is they must be getting enough ad revenue from people
yes.
like this that they don't want to cut off their nose to spite their face.
You know, I don't know the answer, but it all comes down to eyeballs and revenues, in my opinion. When social media giants would say, well, we can't censor, we can't figure out every ad, I'd say, well, I just lived through COVID, where if you started to post and write the letter COV before you got to the ID, a COVID pop-up would come. So there's some mechanism to monitor communication online. I mean, there's something. So when you see that there's exploitation of a child, you know, the sexuality of a child, the sale of pills, there should be a way for them to identify and monitor those type of posts.
Yeah.
And they are working on it, they say, but ultimately they haven't really had to be held accountable yet. And Dr. Laura Berman and Sam Chapman started a petition called #LetParentsProtect, because they want at least to be able to monitor their children's social media accounts, like with AI technology, like platforms like Bark and others. And the social media giants won't even let that software on their platform. So we're pushing for things to change.
Right. Wow, that is wild.
It is wild.
How common is a story like Sammy's? Because, you know, I think it's easy to get riled up by anecdotal sort of stories, but is this a common thing?
This is becoming extremely common. I was just speaking to a woman who has 4 friends who lost children because they purchased pills online that were laced with fentanyl, just in a small group circle of friends. I always say, there's so many threats in the world, there's so many things, but if I had to narrow down the 2 biggest issues I'm worried about as a parent right now, it's online safety, sort of the big bucket of that, but it's also fentanyl-laced pills, because they are making their way into a lot of places very easily. And you know, you reach a point where you tell people you love, don't take anything from anybody. And listen, little Jimmy, do you want to try Percocet? Like, why aren't we having honest conversations with our kids? Your friends are taking Percocet, so you want to try it? Okay, maybe we're not going to be able to get you Percocet, but are you in pain? Do you want to, like, you're lifting weights, your friends say like the muscles hurt, why aren't we talking to our kids about these things for them to even have the opportunity to say, well, Mom, we lift all the time and now my shoulder hurts and I can't wrestle and I have a meet coming up and somebody said if I took Percocet, it's going to go away. Well, no, let's go to the doctor. Let's figure out a solution. It's not always nefarious that they're trying to get high or do whatever. Sometimes they're just trying to solve a problem on their own.
Yep.
Girls say, well, I heard Adderall helps you lose weight. Okay, well, let's talk about why you want to lose weight and let's find a method. Don't buy an Adderall pill online.
Right.
Parents can find solutions to the craziest issues. I know that sounds strange, but we've got to get to that place at this point.
Well, you write a lot about the hurdles facing parents that are trying to or want to get a better handle on these issues. What are some of those hurdles in your research that keep parents from getting a handle?
Well, one, parents think like, I'm gonna give them a rule, like, you're just never allowed on Snapchat. You're not allowed to text. You're not allowed on Instagram. Those things are not your kids mostly. I mean, some are going to listen, but a lot of kids will say, okay, I'm not going to be on Instagram because that's fine. My parents don't realize Pinterest is the new Instagram. Okay, I'm not going to.
Wait, is it really?
Yeah, it's like for the younger generation, yes. Or I'm not going to Pinterest because they can create pin boards, they can post pictures, and they get followers.
I thought that was for like
moms and crafts. I know.
Moms.
Everything changes.
Wow.
Kids say, I'm not going to text, but you didn't say I can't use WhatsApp. And so I'll just text on WhatsApp. So the biggest hurdle is bridging the gap between parents who don't understand the technology and think it can be conquered by the one you're not allowed on Instagram or you're not allowed on, period.
Mission accomplished, problem solved.
I'm done.
Yeah.
And kids who live in this space, it's how they talk, it's how they socialize, it's how they communicate, it's how they learn, it's how they get their grades, how they submit assignments now. It is a huge disconnect. So my goal was, how do we bridge and create overarching principles that the kids say, I can live with that and it makes sense. And parents now are free. And I don't need to know that now, OnlyFans is a thing. I don't want to know, actually. I don't need to know the latest thing because we've created these bridges that will last indefinitely.
Yeah. What are the latest things? What's the kick of 2023?
There's so much. The biggest issue we're seeing is that young kids can make a lot of money on sites where it's like a pay to preview, like OnlyFans and other platforms.
Sexualized stuff.
Yeah, but you can show your knee and charge somebody money to look, because there's going to be some lunatic that wants to see your knee. Kids in today's generation are raised wanting to be consumed. They want eyeballs. They want to trend. They want attention. And social media, even gaming, whatever it is, gives them the platform and the outlet to do it. So they want to find a way to get eyeballs. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge.
What does that equal for them? Eyeballs. Is that value?
Acceptance, value, popularity, accomplishment. And it's all empty, but that's what it means to them.
And it never ends.
And it never ends.
Yeah.
And look, we run an organization. We'll sit and say, why did that Crime Stoppers video get more views than the other one? And why didn't people engage with this one? It's very normal.
Of course.
It's very normal. But when you have a 12-year-old who's saying, why didn't Becky like my post, but she liked that one? Then it's like, well, maybe I need to do more of this, or maybe I need to do more of that. And that's also normal. But
when it's your body versus a news story,
yeah,
that changes the game.
And if you're bringing the video camera into the home, we have to get kids to think about, are you showing the front door in your picture? I'm not telling you not to take a picture, but are you in the bathroom? Are you showing your front door? Are you showing your home address? Are you showing parts of yourself you shouldn't show? So let's get them to think differently about the entire landscape so they make better choices.
Right. Even things as simple as your full name, I think, for kids.
Yeah.
Like maybe a first and middle, but
I know.
giving up all that information is with the nefarious
But I'll tell you,
things going on.
Moms give that information.
Yeah.
So many of us are posting, little Lizzie Smith's first day at school at, junior elementary with Miss Smith as her favorite teacher, because we love our kids and they're so cute and we want to share it. So we actually open the door for them online, giving them this massive footprint in the digital space. And then when they're 10 and they want to do it themselves, we're like, absolutely not. And it's like,
right.
I've been posting about you for 10 years, but now you can't post about yourself. So that's also an interesting issue for me to look at.
Sure.
I like looking at.
I know TikTok's come under fire lately, but you write a lot about Snapchat.
Oh my gosh. They're all great, but they all have some downfalls. But all of these platforms allow you to connect to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and do anything. And so that's the bigger thing. We've got to be talking to our kids. And look, I'll say every single parent, at least one time during the week, is going to say, hey, how was that test on Wednesday? Did you have that math test? That's normal. That's like not weird for you to do as a parent. And the kids expect it and say it was good, it was bad. But very few of us say, did you see that TikTok video? It was hysterical. or what's the latest challenge? We don't talk about it. It's like this taboo thing. My whole thing is you've got to start Google trending issues and start having positive conversations with your kids so you can layer the crazy ones. And I'll tell you the craziest one I saw this week. In Florida, a 12-year-old girl stole her dad's pickup truck, got her 14-year-old friend, drove en route to Louisiana, the 12-year-old driving with her 14-year-old friend so they could meet a man they had been talking to online.
Wow.
The only thing that saved these girls is they stopped in Alabama and they saw their picture on a TV screen at the convenience store at the gas station. And they thought, this is serious and we better call our parents. But why were they going to meet a man in Louisiana that they met online?
It's wild.
It's wild.
There's some serious, obviously some serious needs or conversations that aren't being had at home, but there's also a lot of predators.
Yes.
That are well versed in whatever grooming processes happen, and there's a lot of nefarious deeds in terms of just exposure of. I know your story about some dude on Skype or something that just sort of out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I had an experience like that when I was home with the kids once. We were just, watching some YouTube or something, and the next video that popped up in the algorithm was some kind of Minecraft porn or something, which somehow made its way into the YouTube algorithm for kids. And it's just, that stuff, I guess, is going to happen.
Yes.
But let's talk a little bit more about the myths that naive parents fall prey to. I love the 7 myths you outline in your book. And what are some of those, and how can we be looking out for them?
Well, the biggest myth is that you can keep your kids safe by keeping them off technology. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Second myth is like, well, even if they are on the social media platforms, they're going to protect them somehow. They're going to make sure my 13-year-old doesn't see pornography. Well, no, that's not true.
Right.
They're going to feed your 13-year-old whatever your 13-year-old wants to see. And there are studies. Wall Street Journal did an incredible study on this very issue with a 13-year-old bot that they had created. And by the time they were done having the 13-year-old search for what it was interested in, TikTok and its For You page fed that 13-year-old 569 videos on drugs and over 100 videos on pornography.
What?
And when, Wall Street Journal went back to TikTok and said, how could it's a 13-year-old, granted it's a bot. They said, we're not the parents. That's a user. We give it what it wants to see. So
That sounds like a drug dealer. Things a drug dealer would say.
Seriously,
That's a user.
It's not my problem. I give it what it wants. My kids deserve online privacy. They absolutely do not. I keep saying,
That's one of the myths?
Yeah, my kids deserve privacy. I don't want to be the over-intrusive parent. I'm like, you know what? Have a rule. Get your kid a diary. Talking about the 80s from 1985. Have your kid write whatever they want in the diary, and you don't open the diary and put it under the bed.
There's your privacy.
There's your privacy. But when you're on the World Wide Web, talking to anyone about anything, sharing, no, that's not the space for privacy. So there were quite a few. Kids would say, well, I can handle, at the end of the day, I really can handle what I'm seeing. No, you can't.
No one can.
And mental health experts who've been studying this will say depression's gone up by triple-digit percentages, self-harm's gone up, suicidal ideation, and suicide. Because kids cannot ultimately handle stuff they're not mature enough to handle.
Right. Yeah, whatever the opposite is of the parent who says, my kids deserve privacy online. That's me.
Yes.
I'm very vigilant. I read my kids, I scroll through everything in my kids' phones every night, and their phones stay in my office at night. But they're 13 and 15 now, and they know Daddy scrolls their phones. So they're always one step ahead of me.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of times I just don't know it's like a crime ring, and I'm some kind of outdated police force, and they're way ahead of me. But I'm going to stay vigilant. That doesn't keep me from being vigilant, but I don't know how to monitor or police Snapchat. That to me is the worst one, because it's like people complain about, these teachers these days and the trends conversation, hiding stuff from parents.
Yeah.
Snapchat is that. Snapchat that's their business model.
Hide it.
It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah.
And I can't keep up. So
and your kids are masters at hiding things. Even the best kids.
That's right.
They're the great, wonderful.
And my kids are the best
they
kids.
They are
Just
the
want
best
that
kids,
to be
of
known.
course. There's no question.
But I will say, there's people watching right now going, well, you gave them Snapchat. And that's right. I did. Just my daughter, not my son yet. But, there was something about COVID.
But you know what?
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's not bad that you gave them Snapchat either. And about COVID, to your point.
Well, they were isolated.
Yes.
And I think a lot of parents felt strong-armed or emotionally pulled to get our kids connected by whatever means necessary, because it was such a brutal time to grow up. So.
And my whole theory is, why can't your kids have Snapchat? Of course they can. It's just we have to give them the tools that they agree with that makes them navigate and use it wisely. So the ad for, would you want to buy Xanax, Adderall, Tylenol, whatever, Adderall, decline.
Yeah.
Decline. Or hey, send me a nude pic. Everybody's doing it. What's wrong with you? Decline.
Right.
Decline. I know who I am. I know who I'm going to be online. I know that what I do is going to stay with me indefinitely. We're constantly talking about how that's evolving, and I know how I'm going to operate.
Right.
There's no reason why they can't do that, because they can.
Yeah, and that gets to, I think, the best part of your book. The whole thing's great, but it's not all like just naming problems, which would be an easier book to write.
No.
But you're very solutions-oriented, and these power tools that you give families and parents are, at first I was like, what are we talking about? Brands and things like that? But,
I know.
But just kind of walk us through that, because I think it's so helpful for parents and families.
Well, I wanted a solution really that kids would buy into, and so I had to speak their language.
Yeah.
And I worked a lot with kids in developing this. And so tool number one is we've got to sit down and ask our kids why they're online. And that means everything. Why are they chatting? Why are they gaming? Why are they social media-ing? Why are they whatever, in Pinterest, whatever? And what do they want to accomplish? Because that's going to shape who they are in this space. Ultimately, you want to create a brand for your child. And you're going to think, that's horrific. That's awful.
Like your child's a product.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
it's not what you're saying.
It's not, because when I talk to kids and I show logos like Nike or Mercedes or Aviator Nation, H&M, Gucci, Abercrombie, whatever it is, and it doesn't matter where I am. I've spoken across the country now at this point to many different types of kids, minority kids, ethnic kids, in the Arabic community, I get invited back all over. And they will tell me, no, Nike's that's always super empowering. And I'm like, well, would they ever show a mom of three like me, on the couch sleeping, drooling with a Slurpee because I'm so tired? Never. I say, okay, what about the Mercedes? What is that ad like? And they'll say, oh my God, super sophisticated, super clean car. Blah. I say, well, do they ever show a guy super, he's been gardening or doing the lawn and he has grass all over and he throws mulch in the back? Never would they never. So what are we coming at? These companies know why they're there, and they know what their message is, and they don't deviate.
Yes.
So if our kids can know why they're there and what they want to achieve, and I don't blame them if they say, I want a public page, I think I'm a talented soccer player and love it.
Sure.
Great. If you mom and dad agree, I have no problem. But they need to fine tune who they will be in the space. And by doing even that simple thing, it starts to turn all the gray into a very targeted road for them.
Yes.
I don't really want to like that post or share that post because it kind of goes against my personal brand.
Yeah.
All of a sudden they have a roadmap and it grows with them because who they want, who they are, why they're there, what they want to achieve is going to change over time.
Right.
So we have these conversations as they grow.
Well, what I like about it, I didn't like it at first. I'll be honest, because it grated me somehow. The word brand is a little bit grating. But what I think is the best way to talk about it with kids, not only because that's a word they get, and it makes them feel important, and what they're putting out is important. But the reason I think it's so great is because it actually delineates between online perception and real life.
Yes.
And a brand is just you're just managing perception, right? You're just saying this is who we want to be seen as, and that's who your online persona should be.
Exactly.
It's not who you really are. And in some ways, teaching your kids to see it that way is to say, look, you are who you really are, in real life, IRL, whatever. But then you project this image to the world, and that's fine. Everyone does.
Yes.
We get dressed the way we do in the morning for a reason.
Yeah.
It's all about brand management in a way, because there's certain things we want to be known for, and a lot of things we don't want to be known for.
Right.
And so you create a filter for what should be posted, what should be liked and commented on and said, and in social media spaces. I just think it's brilliant.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
I'm so happy because I know I got some pushback from parents, and I said, but just this is what helps your kids. And then in time, it makes sense. But, when you ask kids, do you think about what you like or what you post or what you comment or share? They'll say, no, I just, whatever my boyfriend posts, I like. Whatever my best friend posts, I like. I share whatever's funny. And I'd say, okay, do you think people form opinions of you? And they'd say, no, I just do whatever. I'd say, all right, that's fine. I say, do you form opinions of other people based on what they post, comment, like, or share? Oh, yes, all the time. Right. So to your point, we kind of flip it and let them see that how they are in real life versus how they are online. It's people form opinions of you based on how you act.
Now that I'm an adult, I think about social media that way.
Oh yeah,
all the time. And
all
most
the time.
comments I want to write, I write and delete.
Right.
For that reason.
Then delete. Don't
That's
ever
right.
post.
That's
yeah,
right.
It's so true.
So defining your brand is tool number one. The second
Yes.
one is define your community. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So depending on why you're there and what you want to be, what your point is. And again, I don't judge. Well, that's going to decide your community. You might have a really small community because you're a private account and blah, 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 which also has some loopholes in it. Or you might cast a really wide net. You want a public profile. You're in a lot of spaces. Great. But we just have to be thinking about who's consuming our content, because these people in time are going to want to reach out to you. There's your best friend. There's your boyfriend. There's your girlfriend. There's your parents, your aunts, your uncles. There's your teachers, your coach. There's people who see you as a potential target. There's scammers. There's predators. There's the friend today, the enemy tomorrow, the student that's envious of you from the other school. When you, and we go through a list, I go through a list in the book, but when you do that exercise with kids, they'll say, I never really thought about the fact that in the 200 views of my video, one or two might be people who really don't like. I never even really thought about that. So if we can get them to think about the net they're casting and who's consuming, it helps them sort of put a guard up a little bit. And that, I think, is important for kids.
That's awesome. So that's a very clear goal, and I think one that everyone can get on board with. The third is developing an exit strategy. Now, what do you mean?
This is the hardest 2 chapters of the book to write because I needed kids to have an escape plan. So I divided it between things that externally come at them online and things that brew internally. So externally, hey, buy this pill. Hey, take a nude photo. By the way, a majority of kids have been asked for a nude picture. That's like a big thing. Challenge. There's this challenge at school. Go ruin the toilets, whatever the challenges are. Break the windshield wiper of your neighbor's car. All these things that come at them externally versus the things that brew internally. They're home alone. No one's even talking to them, but they're looking at the social media posts and they say, this is the 3rd weekend in a row. All my friends went out and didn't include me. Or I'm so jealous of little Lindsay. She's so pretty. She has the best boy. She has the best clothes. And I have nothing. I have nothing. Things brew internally that are so significant over time. Kids take their own lives. And that is not an exaggeration. So I needed kids, whether it's something threatening them externally or thoughts that are brewing internally, I need them to know these things exist so they can recognize it when it comes either externally or brewing internally, and they can block it. They have a way to exit. So that was very important because there was a lot of great stuff like that comes up and kids don't even know what it is. And it's like the aftermath. They don't know how to respond. They responded wrong. I needed to put that in a roadmap for them.
Right. And there's more to it than just scrolling past.
Yeah.
Or ignoring it or whatever. There's more to be done. You can teach your kids to be more assertive in terms of actually following through with the block and a report. And tell somebody else, tell me as your parent about this. And, I think that's an important strategy. I tell my kids that with, anytime they're in large crowds or groups of people, it's like always know what you would do in case of emergency. And that's a very similar thing, but in the online world. Okay, so number 4 is fun. Post like a celebrity.
Yeah.
Tell us about that one.
The one that gets me in the most trouble. So I was actually in a high school class when I really decided I was going to formalize this. But I was in a high school class and I was fortunate enough the teachers were fortunate enough to give me leeway with the high school students, and they were juniors and seniors. And I said, guys, I want to do an experiment with you. I said, I want you guys to post like celebrities, and I want to tell you what I mean. And the kids were like, yeah, finally, this woman's making sense. She's finally interesting, because we've been talking about online safety. I said, all right, pull out your phone if you have Instagram and the teacher allows. Let's go on Instagram. Yay, woohoo, that's fun. So I said, all right, pick your favorite person, celebrity, sports person, music person, influencer. They did. I said, all right. I said, okay, I want you to raise your hand. I want you to start looking through their feed. I want you to raise your hand the moment you can get me a home address. And you see these kids say, okay. And they start going through their phone, and they say, oh, it's so weird. No, I can't really get a home address or even a home number. Right. I said, nothing. I said, I can't. I said, no, they can't do that. I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, okay, well, usually these people are pretty wealthy and they have like the best cars, right? Just raise your hand the second you can get me a license plate number. And without fail, I have somebody say, oh my gosh, I even know what post I'm going to. Okay, give me a second. And they go through, and they say, oh, that's so weird. I never know. He's standing in front of the G-Wagon. It's a great G-Wagon, by the way. My dream car, side note. He's standing in front of the G-Wagon, but it's so weird. I never noticed he's blocking the license plate.
Yep.
I thought, oh, that's very interesting. I said, okay. Well, I said, well, usually they represent a company. What is the business? I just want to see Taylor Swift pull into her parking lot. Now, I want to see J-Lo pull into her parking lot. Just what is, and they'll look through and they'll say, we can't find it. That's so weird. And what I talk to the kids about is what they fail to see is that these celebrities that they admire, and studies have been done. I'm sorry. This is a fact. They look up to these people.
Yeah.
Studies have shown they admire them. What they fail to see, though, is as these people are sharing content, they've made it impossible for you to find them in real time. They've made their physical, personal security their number one priority. Not just they, the celebrities, but they have entire teams that make sure you cannot find them in real time. We should be following that. Now, I'll always have a kid that say, well, what about the Kardashians? You know, they post in real time. And I'd say, that's a great question. And we all know Kim Kardashian was robbed in Paris. But let's look at the bigger issue. The Kardashians travel with 1 or 2 security teams. And last I checked, little Jimmy, I didn't see your security team outside the cafeteria. So let's emulate, maybe not their choices in life. And I'm not talking about morals. I'm talking about their choices to be safe.
Yeah.
They have entire teams, from phone numbers to what type of cell phones they use to privacy settings to never sharing GPS location. Pictures, no stamps are there in terms of, okay, we should do the same. I'm not saying don't post. I'm not saying don't be on the space. I'm saying respect yourself, protect yourself.
Yeah.
As much as these people that you emulate do, and keep yourself physically safe.
That's so
And
good.
they get it.
That's the part that I like the most. And that's why I think everyone should read this book. And this is not a paid promotion at all, but I just think it's such an important book and well written for families that are on the front lines now. It's not just for information for adults that are just wanting to know what's going on. It's also a manual that uses language that kids will resonate with. I mean, brand and celebrity and all these things. I know it wasn't probably easy to hit send on that draft, but and you face some a little bit of pushback probably here and there from people for using these kinds of words. But you wrote this so that we could engage with our kids and not just know about our kids and what's going on in the world, because it is that important. And you wrote it that way because it's that important to you that your kids and other kids are safe.
I understand other experts say, look, the real answer is this space is dangerous and our kids shouldn't be on it. And I agree. But there are going to be an overwhelming number of kids who are on it.
I mean,
and so we can't ignore that.
Like be Amish and have our kids unprepared?
There's no way.
It's a tough line to walk sometimes.
It is.
I appreciate you helping us walk it. And I think one of the reasons you're so driven to this, as we talked about earlier, is because you've seen what happens when the worst case scenarios unfold.
Yeah.
Or when parents are underinformed or unprepared.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about what you've seen in terms of these stories locally, even here in Houston, with kids getting caught up in things?
There's so many stories, unfortunately. And I just, we shared what happened in Florida 2 days ago. Houston is seeing an unbelievable problem with the extortion, the blackmail of young boys. And so big stories, very common right now. I mean, I have schools calling me saying, what do we do about this? Is they'll be gaming with somebody, just chatting. They'll be gaming with them over time. And then the person on the other line will say, hey, what are you wearing? Like, what do you look like right now? And just take a picture, but don't send me anything weird. Don't be weird. And so the boys are like, okay, by the way, our kids communicate via pictures. They text and do a photo of the ceiling. They send pictures very commonly. They FaceTime. That's how they talk. And so when these people say, send me a picture of, whatever you look like right now, the boys do that. They're talking to a predator who then manipulates the photo, makes it look sexualized, and then blackmails the boys. And we've had kids in the Houston area give birthday gift cards, ask friends for money, thousands of dollars to try to get themselves out of a situation that they got into because they sent the person a photo. The person didn't steal a photo off Instagram. The person established, I have an actual connection to you. You sent me a private picture. no one's going to believe you when it turned, I manipulated and made it look sexual, but no one's going to believe you. We obviously have a connection. So these boys are, this is a huge problem right now across the country, but really very much in Houston.
And they're saying we'll go public with it. We'll put it out there unless you send me whatever. Okay.
And they send money and it's never enough. We have a Houston family one of the most gut-wrenching stories is of a really well-loved greater Houston area family, oil and gas executive, dad, a great family, mom and dad at home, brother and sister at home, aggressively involved in their children's lives. And their daughter was lured online, followed for some time, even to the point of having interactions with the sex trafficker. They recruit young kids to befriend our children. And this girl's
like middle management, sort of.
Yep. Wow. And so this girl had befriended a young girl who was working for the traffickers. Following her online for quite some time. She didn't make a bad choice. She made a choice that a lot of young kids do.
Sure.
Ended up going to Snapchat to say, hey, I need a ride somewhere. And that's where the predator found his opportunity, picked her up. She was horrifically trafficked. The story's actually in the book. She was horrifically trafficked. Her dad poured his heart and soul into finding his daughter, and he did. And now works on changing legislation in the state of Texas, helping parents identify when their kids are being groomed online. And, their lives have changed. And the biggest thing he said is, this is not an anomaly. She's one of many girls who are followed online, lured online, spoken to online. They're now sending kids to befriend them in the real world through activities.
And it's a slow burn. Like it's
Yes.
years in the making.
Because once they capitalize, they'll wait a year. They will wait a year because they need the child to willingly end up in their hands. Because a child who looks like a runaway it becomes very complicated for law enforcement. It's not an abduction because then it's like the world stops. This is a child who walks into the arms of a predator because it becomes a much harder case. So he's just phenomenal. He's just phenomenal.
In that case, was the trafficker like arrested or tried? Do we know?
So that trafficker, I believe, got out on deferred adjudication, walked out of the courtroom with the dad. It's devastating.
Yeah.
It is devastating. It is devastating. You have the cases of kids taking pills being laced with fentanyl, vaping pens where they don't know exactly what's in it and they get them online. Cyberbullying that turns to kids. We had one story, a Texas City family whose daughter was so horrifically cyberbullied. It was relentless. They'd get her a new phone. They'd change the phone number. The bullies would find the new number and they just never stopped. Thanksgiving Day, she was in her bedroom. Her dad came up to check on her. She said, "Dad, I'm sorry." And she shot herself in the head in front of her father. These problems become so overwhelming for these kids. And it's too much for us to ignore. And the thought of it's not our family, it's not our house, it could never be our kid. That's a huge, one of the big 7 myths. It can always be our kids because the online world doesn't discriminate. They just need contact. That's all they need, contact. And that's what the digital space provides.
And as good as you think your kids are, and we all want to think our kids are the best, teenage years are highly vulnerable, susceptible years as far as self-esteem goes and self-image. And, these people know what they're doing.
Yes.
And if they victimize our kids won't be their first victims.
No.
It's a program that works in some ways.
The FBI said on any given day, there's 500,000 to 750,000 predators online, like seasoned predators targeting anywhere from 10 and to more children. So this is their business. And then you have the relentless abuse of just peers that just have nothing else to do but bully, and they can be very creative with it. So it runs the gamut.
So the lingering question here for me and a lot of parents watching right now, as someone who has seen it all, you've seen it all, you've seen way too much. It's probably kept you up at night. I hope you have a good therapist. And
that's why my eye twitches.
Yeah, right. the question is, you still send your kids to public schools? You still have your kids somewhat connected in different ways online? You haven't yet bought a ranch in the middle of Central Texas and gone off the grid, and you don't homeschool your kids yet. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you still have them out and about. What keeps you doing what you do and having them out in the world, knowing what you know?
I think education is not there to make you paranoid. It's there to make you feel powerful. And I always say it's similar to getting on an airplane. Every time you get on an airplane, you sit through those security worst case scenario situations. If there's no oxygen, if you have a crash landing, if you land in water, the life vest. But we don't say like, we got to get off this plane. We got to stop flying. We say, I'm so glad the airline industry is so safe, and we keep flying. And I believe that we live in a broken world. There's depravity, there's sin, call it what you want. There's no way to stop that. But there is a way to arm yourself and have hope and be encouraged and go out there and do the best you can do and be a lifeline for others while you're protecting yourself. And I think that's so powerful. Yeah. I don't feel paranoid or scared. I'm like, go do more now. Go out, go to the school, do this. Why not? You know what to look for. You know what to not do. And so go experience everything.
And maybe our kids can even be agents of change.
Absolutely. I believe that big time.
Because these technologies can be used for good as much as evil if the kids are ready for that and prepared. And so we send them out almost like ministers and missionaries in a way. And you talked about you see crime as sin in a way because you're a Christian.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you talking about it that way. But that also ties into the fact that this isn't a career for you. It's every bit of calling as pastoring is for me.
It's very personal. And it's, we had 2 years where we were sort of just targeted because crime became so political. And I was the face of a lot of that targeting. And it was hard because I felt like, God, I feel like I pray every day. This is like a sort of ministry, in my heart. And I was fed to the wolves. But then coming out of it, and my dad died at that time, it was really hard. Like God was like, you're going to get it from every angle. But it also was so encouraging because I was like, when you do good work, this is what happens. When you're dealing with the worst part of humanity, you're going to get burned and stained and scarred. And,
that's right.
But that's great. That it was very, very, at the end of the day, as hard as those times were, it didn't break my spirit. It made me feel stronger and stand more in my faith and more encouraged that I'm not made of, what people say of me. I'm made of something much deeper, and I'm going to keep doing the work I've always set out to do. And that's, for me, fantastic.
Amen. And it is deeply spiritual, in my view. And when you talk about all this predatory behavior and trying to rob children of innocence,
yes.
and that's just that's Satan 101 from my vantage point. I know not everybody believes that, but I see it as spiritual warfare of sorts. And I had someone tell me that in that way, when you're over the target, you take the most flack.
Yes.
And I think you're over a lot of important targets from the enemy's perspective, and I hope you'll keep going because it's making a huge, unspeakable difference, and it will for many years to come.
We appreciate that and always ask for prayer for our team, prayer for the organization, prayer for all of us. And we're so thankful for opportunities to talk about the work of Crime Stoppers and what we do. We're made of a big group of people who really care, and we work literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 365 days a year. So any opportunity to talk about that means the world. So we thank you.
So good. Well, we will pray for you and for Crime Stoppers, and I hope everybody picks up your book as well. Let me say it one more time here.
No.
Great cover.
Thank you.
The Online World. Rania Mankarious, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.